The galaxy did not scream when the end began. It held its breath. High above the crystalline spires of the throne world, Empress Valeriana, a being of living obsidian and starlight, watched the tactical hollows with a look of profound boredom. To her, the destruction of a world wasn't a tragedy. It was a housekeeping chore. She had ruled for 3,000 years, and in that time, she had snuffed out species far more advanced than the fragile bipedal creatures of the Third Rock. Earth was a decimal point in her ledger of conquest. A noisy, defiant little planet that had dared to push back against her border scouts. Her response was calculated to be absolute. She didn't send a diplomat. She didn't send a warning. She sent the Grand Annihilator Fleet, 12,000 dreadnoughts, each capable of cracking a tectonic plate. As they formed a shimmering, suffocating ring around Earth's atmosphere, the world below fell into a terrifying silence. The Empress expected a plea for mercy. She expected the frantic transmissions of a species realizing their insignificance. Instead, the sensors on her flagship picked up something so improbable, so absurd, that her high priests of logic briefly thought the equipment had failed. Humanity hadn't launched their defense fleet. They hadn't hidden in bunkers. In the face of total extinction, the humans did something that defied every law of interstellar warfare. While the massive cannons of the Empire were powering up to turn the Pacific Ocean into steam, a single tiny, unarmed vessel detached from the moon's shadow. It wasn't a warship. It wasn't a bomber. It was a long-range diplomatic shuttle, painted a startling defiant white, and it wasn't fleeing. It was accelerating, not away from the fleet, but directly toward the heart of the Empire. Hold on before we get into the real stuff. I want to know. What are you doing at this exact moment while hearing my voice? I love seeing your answers down below in the comments. The Empress leaned forward, her eyes glowing with a dangerous curiosity. A single ship? She whispered, her voice like grinding glass. Her advisors urged her to vaporize it instantly. Why waste a second on a gnat when the feast of a world awaited? But Valeriana felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in centuries. Genuine surprise. This ship was traveling through the Fold Gates, using the Empire's own transit network, with a brazenness that bordered on insanity. It was heading for the throne world. It was heading for her. The tiny vessel skipped through the dimensions, ignoring the thousands of guns pointed at its hull. It carried no weapons, no shields of any consequence, and yet it moved with the grace of a predator that knew it was already home. On the bridge of that ship sat a man named Commander Elias Thorne. He wasn't a decorated general or a hardened killer. He was a man who carried a single briefcase and a memory of a blue sky he might never see again. He knew the odds were impossible. He knew that by the time he reached the Empress, his home might already be ash. As the shuttle exited warp directly in the restricted airspace of the Empress's private sanctum, the entire planetary defense grid locked on. One word from Valeriana would turn Elias and his mission into stardust. The Empress watched the small craft hover peacefully against the backdrop of her golden sun. She stayed the hand of her executioners. She wanted to see the face of the man who thought a single ship could stop the end of the world. But as the docking clamps engaged, she didn't realize that the man on that ship wasn't there to beg for Earth's life. He was there to change hers forever. The air in the Empress's throne room was thick with the scent of ozone and ancient incense. As the heavy obsidian doors hissed open, silence fell over the assembled high lords of the Valerian Empire. They stood like frozen statues, their many-eyed gazes fixed on the lone figure walking down the long crystalline aisle. Commander Elias Thorne didn't look like a savior. He wore a simple dark flight suit, his boots echoing with a steady rhythmic thud that seemed to mock the grandeur of the chamber. He didn't bow. He didn't tremble. He simply stopped at the edge of the gravity well that separated the mortal floor from the Empress's floating dais. High above him, Empress Valeriana shimmered. Her skin, a mosaic of dark minerals and glowing veins, pulsed with a rhythmic violet light. She looked down at Elias not with hatred, but with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a strange new microbe. "You are the voice of Earth?" she asked, her voice resonating through the very floorboards. "You traveled across the void, leaving your world to burn, just to stand in my presence? Is your species so desperate for a witness to their extinction?" Elias looked up, and for the first time, the Empress saw his eyes. They weren't filled with the frantic terror she was used to seeing in the Conquered. They were calm, terrifyingly calm. "I didn't come here to watch my world die, Your Majesty," Elias said, his voice carrying a gravelly warmth that felt strangely out of place in the cold, sterile hall. "I came here because your generals made a mathematical error. They calculated our fleet strength, our shield frequencies, and our industrial output. But they forgot to calculate the cost of a broken heart." A ripple of mocking laughter spread through the High Lords. To the Valerians, emotion was a biological weakness, a vestige of evolution that they had long ago pruned from their DNA. But Valeriana didn't laugh. She leaned forward, her long, elegant fingers gripping the edge of her throne. There was something in this man's posture, a quiet confidence that felt like a hidden blade. "Hearts do not stop fusion cannons, Commander," she countered, her eyes narrowing. "At this very moment, my fleet is synchronizing their firing patterns. In less than an hour, your oceans will boil. Why are you really here?" Elias reached for the briefcase he carried. Instantly, 100 sonic rifles leveled at his head. He didn't flinch. He slowly opened the latch and pulled out a small, archaic-looking device, a simple glass projector. He placed it on the floor and stepped back. "We knew we couldn't outgun you," Elias admitted, his gaze never leaving the Empress's. "So we decided to show you what you're actually destroying, not the military bases, not the factories, but the reason we refuse to surrender." The projector hummed to life, casting a holographic image into the center of the throne room. It wasn't a map of Earth's defenses or a list of resources. It was a memory. A field of lavender swaying in a warm breeze under a setting sun. Two people, a man and a woman, laughing as they danced to music that only they could hear. The imagery was so vivid, so raw with sensory data, that even the cold-blooded Valerian lords felt a strange phantom ache in their chests. It was a display of pure, unadulterated human connection, a frequency the Empire hadn't tuned into for eons. The Empress watched the hologram, her violet light flickering erratically. For a fleeting second, her regal mask slipped, revealing a glimpse of the woman she might have been before she became a monument to power. Elias took a step forward, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt louder than a shout. "That woman in the field. She was my wife. She died during your first orbital strike. And every person on that fleet circling my home has a story just like hers. You think you're fighting a war of conquest, Valeriana, but you've actually started a war of grief. And you have no idea how dangerous a grieving human can be." The tension in the room surged to a breaking point. The Empress stood up, her translucent robes swirling like a nebula. She looked at the hologram of the dancing couple, then back at the lone man who had dared to bring a ghost into her house. She realized then that this ship hadn't come to deliver a message of peace. It had come to deliver a contagion. "You think a few pretty pictures will stay my hand?" she hissed, though her voice lacked its previous iron. "My ships are ready. The order has been given." Elias smiled then, a sad knowing smile that chilled the air. "The order has been given," he agreed. "But look at your screens, Empress. Look at what happened the moment my ship docked with yours. We didn't just bring memories. We brought a choice." Suddenly, the massive tactical displays surrounding the throne room began to glitch, flashing red with an urgent, unprecedented warning from the fleet orbiting Earth. The holographic displays in the throne room didn't just glitch, they bled. Crimson warnings cascaded down the obsidian walls, a digital scream echoing from the Grand Annihilator Fleet thousands of light years away. Empress Valeriana's advisors scrambled, their fingers dancing over control interfaces that refused to respond. "Report," she commanded, her voice cracking the sudden silence like a whip. A high priest of logistics looked up, his face pale with a terror he hadn't felt in a millennium. Empress. The fleet. They aren't firing. They've ceased all aggressive maneuvers. Elias Thorne stood perfectly still, the light from the lavender field hologram reflecting in his tired eyes. He looked like a man who had already accepted his fate, making him the most dangerous person in the room. "What have you done?" Valeriana hissed, descending the steps of her dais, her physical presence overwhelming and cold. "Did you think a virus could take down a Valerian dreadnought? Our firewalls are forged in the hearts of dying stars." She was inches from him now, her scent like frozen ozone and ancient dust. "It's not a virus, Valeriana," Elias said softly, refusing to use her title. "It's a broadcast." He gestured toward the flickering tactical screens. "Your soldiers are telepathic, aren't they? They share a collective consciousness, a unified will directed by you, but that connection works both ways. When my ship docked, we didn't upload code. We uploaded us." The screens shifted from tactical data to a chaotic, beautiful montage of human existence. First steps, final breaths, the roar of a crowded stadium, and the quiet sobbing of a child. The Empress recoiled as if struck. The Valerian collective was built on cold logic and the absolute suppression of the individual. They functioned as a hive of efficiency. But humanity was a riot of conflicting emotions, a tidal wave of sorrow, joy, and unyielding love. By linking his ship to the throne world's hub, Elias had injected the raw, unfiltered emotional spectrum of 8 billion humans directly into the Empire's nervous system. The fleet wasn't malfunctioning. The crews were paralyzed, overwhelmed by the sudden, agonizing weight of human empathy. "You are poisoning them." Valeriana roared, her hand snapping out to grip Elias by the throat. Her strength was immense, her fingers like heated iron pressing against his windpipe. Elias didn't struggle. He looked directly into her glowing violet eyes, his expression one of profound pity. "I'm not poisoning them," he wheezed, a faint trail of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. "I'm waking them up. For the first time in 10,000 years, your soldiers are feeling the lives they are about to end. Can you hear it, Valeriana? The sound of 12,000 crews realizing they don't want to be murderers?" The Empress tightened her grip, her own mind beginning to fray at the edges. She could feel it too, the distant echoes of billions of hearts beating in sync. She felt the warmth of a mother's touch, the sting of a betrayal, the intoxicating rush of a first kiss. It was a sensory overload that threatened to shatter her obsidian soul. The High Lords behind her were collapsing, clutching their heads as the humanity signal tore through their mental barricades. The cold, dark order of the Empire was dissolving into a beautiful, terrifying chaos. Valeriana looked at the man she held in her grasp. He was so small, so fragile, yet he carried the emotional weight of an entire world. She saw the grief he mentioned earlier, the loss of his wife, and it hit her like a physical blow. She saw herself through his eyes, a lonely queen in a tower of glass, surrounding herself with silence because she was afraid of the song. Her grip loosened just a fraction. "You would sacrifice your own life just to make us feel?" She whispered, her voice trembling for the first time in history. "I'd sacrifice everything to make you stop," Elias replied, his voice a ghost of a sound. Outside the palace, the golden sun of the throne world began to dim as the planetary shields flickered. The Empire was losing its grip on its own technology because it was losing its grip on its own coldness. But then, a new alarm began to wail, not a warning of a virus, but a physical proximity alert. Something was emerging from the shadows of the throne world's own moon, something Elias hadn't mentioned. The high-pitched wail of the proximity alarm cut through the emotional haze like a jagged blade. The Empress shoved Elias back, her obsidian skin glowing a frantic, pulsating violet. "More tricks?" She snarled, her eyes darting to the overhead tactical rift. "Is this your one-ship strategy? A Trojan horse to bring an armada to my doorstep?" On the main view screen, a massive silhouette began to blot out the stars. It wasn't a sleek human cruiser or a clunky freighter. It was an ancient, scarred hulk of a ship, trailing plumes of frozen atmosphere, its hull covered in the jagged marks of 1,000 forgotten battles. Elias Thorne steadied himself against a crystalline pillar, gasping for air as the bruises on his neck began to darken. He looked at the screen, and for the first time, a look of genuine uncertainty crossed his face. "That's not us," he whispered, his voice raspy. "We don't have anything that big. That's something else entirely." The unknown vessel didn't broadcast a transponder code. It didn't hail the palace. It simply drifted into the center of the Imperial defense grid, absorbing the panicked fire of the automated orbital platforms as if they were nothing more than summer rain. The Empress turned to her High Lords, but they were useless. Still reeling from the humanity signal Elias had unleashed, the collective consciousness was fractured. The disciplined hive mind was a mess of sobbing generals and laughing priests. Valeriana was alone. She turned back to the tactical map, her mind racing. "If it is not yours, and it is not mine," she whispered, the realization hitting her like a physical blow, "then the Scourge has found us." The Scourge, a mindless, consuming hunger from the great void that the Valerians had spent eons hiding from. The very reason they had built such a cold, rigid empire was to remain invisible to this ancient predator. The Scourge ship began to pulse with a sickly bioluminescent green light. From its underside, thousands of organic pods launched, screaming through the atmosphere toward the throne world. The Empire's defenses were paralyzed by the human emotional virus, unable to coordinate a counterattack. The very empathy Elias had used to save Earth had accidentally stripped the Empire of its armor at the worst possible moment. "You've killed us all," Valeriana said, turning to Elias with a look of cold, tragic clarity. "In your quest to save your little blue dot, you've fed the center of the galaxy to the dark." Elias watched the green streaks descending like falling stars toward the spires of the city below. He looked at the glass projector on the floor, still looping the image of the couple dancing in the lavender field. The contrast between that moment of peace and the impending slaughter was unbearable. He didn't see an enemy in Valeriana anymore. He saw a woman facing the end of everything she had ever built. The romantic tension that had been simmering between their two clashing wills, the warmth of his humanity against the cold brilliance of her divinity, snapped into a desperate, shared purpose. "We can still fight," Elias said, stepping toward her, reaching out a hand he had no right to offer. "Your fleet is paralyzed because they're feeling for the first time. They aren't broken, Valeriana, they're overwhelmed. You don't need to command them with logic anymore. You need to lead them with what I gave you." The Empress looked at his outstretched hand, then at the monsters tearing through her sky. The Scourge didn't feel. They didn't love. They only consumed. To defeat them, she would have to embrace the very thing she had tried to destroy: the chaotic, beautiful power of the human heart. The first of the Scourge pods slammed into the palace gardens, the shockwave shattering the stained glass windows of the throne room. Shards of crystal rained down like diamonds. Valeriana didn't flinch. She looked at Elias, her violet eyes meeting his brown ones. In that moment, the gap between their species vanished. She reached out, her cool, mineral hand closing around his warm, trembling one. A surge of energy, part biological, part technological, and entirely emotional, erupted from their contact, sending a golden shockwave through the palace. The golden shockwave didn't just rattle the windows. It vibrated through the very souls of every being on the throne world. As Valeriana's hand locked with Elias's, the humanity signal stopped being a chaotic noise and became a focused beam of pure, defiant will. The Empress gasped, her head throwing back as her consciousness expanded, fueled by the raw adrenaline and desperate love Elias carried for his dying world. She wasn't just a cold observer anymore. She was feeling the fire of human history, the wars fought for freedom, the poetry written in trenches, and the stubborn refusal to blink in the face of the dark. "I see it now," Valeriana whispered, her voice no longer a monotone chime but a melodic, trembling roar. "The strength isn't in the steel. It's in the reason we forge it." She closed her eyes, and through their joined hands, she projected a new command to her paralyzed fleet. She didn't send coordinates or firing solutions. She sent the memory of the lavender field. She sent the feeling of a newborn's breath. She sent the crushing weight of Elias's grief and the soaring hope of his mission. She gave her soldiers a reason to fight that was greater than her own ego. Across the galaxy, 12,000 Valerian dreadnoughts shuddered. The crews, previously weeping or dazed, suddenly snapped into a terrifying singular focus. They weren't fighting for an Empress anymore. They were fighting for the right to exist in a universe that contains such beauty. The Grand Annihilator Fleet, still ringing the Earth, performed a synchronized warp jump that defied every known law of physics. They didn't leave Earth to its fate. They left a defensive shell of automated drones and plummeted through the rift, appearing in the skies of the throne world in a flash of blinding white light. The Scourge pods mid-descent were vaporized by a wall of pinpoint-accurate lance-fire. The sky above the palace turned into a canvas of exploding green bile and shimmering violet shields. The Valerians were no longer fighting like machines. They were fighting with a desperate, artistic ferocity. They took risks they never would have taken under the old regime, diving their massive ships into the paths of Scourge projectiles to save civilian sectors. It was a ballet of destruction, a symphony of two species finally playing the same tune. But on the ground, the palace was still under siege. A massive Scourge biotitan, a mountain of chitin and pulsing green veins, smashed through the northern wall of the throne room. Its many-jointed limbs scraped against the crystal floor, and a hollow, soul-piercing shriek filled the air. The High Lords fled in terror, but Valeriana stood her ground. Her hand still gripped tightly in Elias's. She looked at him, a faint, crystalline tear tracing a path down her obsidian cheek. "In all my cycles," she said softly, "I never knew that a heart could beat this fast." Elias pulled a small, high-frequency kinetic pistol from his flight suit, the only weapon he had brought, intended for himself if the mission failed. He leveled it at the towering monster. "It's called being alive, Valeriana," he said, his thumb clicking the safety off. "And it's a lot more fun than being a statue." The Biotitan lunged, its massive mandibles dripping with a corrosive acid that hissed as it hit the floor. But as it moved, the golden light between Elias and the Empress flared, forming a protective barrier that burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The monster recoiled, blinded by the sheer purity of their connection. In that moment of shared defiance, the boundaries of the physical world seemed to blur. Elias felt the Empress's ancient power flowing into him, while she felt his mortality, his fragility, and the incredible courage it took to be a human in a universe of giants. They weren't just a diplomat and a queen anymore. They were the focal point of a cosmic shift, but the Biotitan wasn't alone. Behind it, hundreds of smaller, blade-limbed Scourge crawlers were pouring through the breach, their eyes fixed on the two beings holding the light. The throne room transformed into a chaotic sanctuary of light and shadow. As the tide of Scourge crawlers surged forward, their chittering legs clicking against the crystal floor like 1,000 falling knives, Elias and Valeriana stood back to back. The golden bond between them didn't just shield them. It weaponized their connection. Every time Elias fired his kinetic pistol, the rounds trailed violet imperial energy, shattering the Scourge carapaces with the force of miniature stars. Valeriana, normally a distant commander of fleets, was now a whirlwind of physical destruction, her obsidian limbs moving with a fluid, human grace she had stolen from Elias's very soul. "They are endless!" Valeriana shouted over the roar of the battle, her palms erupting with pulses of starlight that turned the lead crawlers into ash. But even as she spoke, she wasn't afraid. For the first time in 3 millennia, she felt the electric thrill of a heartbeat that wasn't her own. She felt Elias's breath, ragged and hot, against the back of her neck. She felt the way his muscles tensed before he moved. It was an intimacy more profound than any telepathic link, a biological synchronization that made them a single devastating unit. Elias slammed a fresh magazine into his pistol, his eyes darting to the massive Biotitan recovering in the center of the hall. "We don't need to kill them all," he yelled. ducking under a Scourge blade that whistled through the air where his head had been a second before. "We just need to kill the signal. The Scourge ship in orbit, it's the brain. If we take that out, the rest of these things become mindless meat." He looked up at the ceiling, where the shimmering atmospheric shields were buckling under the weight of the organic pods still screaming down from the stars. The Empress looked at him, a strange, beautiful smile touching her mineral lips. It was a look of pure, reckless joy, a human expression on a godlike face. "You want to board the Hive ship?" she asked, the idea sounding like madness even to her. "With one shuttle and a handful of kinetic rounds?" Elias didn't blink. He reached out and grabbed her hand again, the golden spark reigniting instantly. "I brought one ship to your throne, Valeriana. I think I can handle one more." In that moment, the romantic tension that had been building since Elias first stepped off his shuttle reached its breaking point. In the middle of a literal apocalypse, surrounded by monsters and falling crystal, the Empress of 1,000 worlds leaned in. Her forehead touched his, the cool obsidian meeting his warm skin. "Then let us show the void," she whispered, her voice a melody of power and longing. What happens when the heart of a human meets the soul of an empress? With a roar of redirected energy, Valeriana didn't just call her personal guard. She reached out to the very structure of the palace itself. The throne room's floor began to shift, the ancient gravity drives humming a low bass note that shook the foundations of the planet. A hidden launch bay, concealed for centuries beneath the dais, slid open to reveal a craft that looked like a shard of fallen night. It was the Empress's personal star sail, a vessel built for speed and elegance, now repurposed for a suicide mission. As they sprinted toward the ship, the Bio-Titan lunged one last time, its massive claw swiping through the air. Elias didn't even look back. He trusted the violet shield Valeriana threw up behind them. They leaped into the cockpit, the systems coming to life with a golden glow that matched their joined hands. The star sail didn't just take off. It vanished in a blur of light, punching through the palace roof and soaring toward the blackened sky. But as they cleared the atmosphere, they saw the true scale of the nightmare. The Scourge hive ship wasn't just a vessel, it was a moon-sized organism, and its maw was opening to swallow the throne world whole. The star sail streaked toward the gaping maw of the hive ship like a needle aiming for the heart of a titan. Inside the cockpit, the air was electric, a physical manifestation of the bond between Elias and Valeriana. The massive organic vessel loomed ahead, its surface a pulsing sickly green landscape of weeping sores and twitching sensory tendrils. Thousands of smaller Scourge interceptors swarmed toward them, but Valeriana steered the craft with a precision that bordered on the supernatural. She wasn't just flying a ship. She was dancing through a graveyard, her movements fueled by the raw, human instinct she had absorbed from Elias. "The core is just past the secondary digestive tract," Valeriana shouted, her hands glowing as they merged with the ship's controls. "But their internal shields are reacting to our life signs. They know we're here, Elias." The star sail slammed through a membrane of reinforced chitin, entering the dark, humid interior of the hive ship. The walls here were alive, undulating with a rhythmic, wet thud that mirrored a heartbeat. It was a cathedral of biological horror, and at its center sat a pulsing emerald sun, the hive mind's neural hub. Elias unbuckled from his seat, standing unsteady as the ship banked hard to avoid a spray of acidic bile. He looked at the glowing core, then at the woman who had gone from his executioner to his soulmate in the span of a single day. "We have to overload it with the signal, Valeriana," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "The same way I woke up your fleet. We have to give this thing more emotion than its hive mind can process. We have to give it everything." Valeriana stood and met him in the center of the small cabin. She knew what he was asking. To broadcast that level of emotional energy wouldn't just kill the Scourge. It would likely burn out their own neural pathways. It was a final, beautiful sacrifice. She took his hands in hers, her obsidian skin cooling as she channeled every ounce of her imperial power into the bridge he provided. "I was a monument of stone for 3,000 years, Elias Thorne," she whispered, her violet eyes shining with a very human moisture. "Thank you for teaching me how to bleed." They closed their eyes, and the golden light exploded. It wasn't a blast of heat, but a wave of memory and feeling so intense the hive ship began to scream. They projected the scent of rain on dry earth, the ache of a long-distance goodbye, the triumph of a first flight, and the quiet, enduring peace of a life well lived. The emerald core of the Scourge ship turned a frantic, blinding white. The organic walls began to dissolve, unable to contain the sheer complexity of human love and sorrow. The hive mind, built for simple consumption, shattered under the weight of 1,000,000,000 individual dreams. Outside, the Valerian fleet watched in awe as the moon-sized horror simply came apart. It didn't explode. It drifted away in shimmering flakes of light, the Scourge creatures on the planet below collapsing into dust as their connection severed. The war was over. In the silence that followed, a single, scarred star sail drifted out from the cloud of stardust, its engines dark but its hull intact. On the bridge, 2 figures sat side by side, watching the sun rise over the throne world, a world that was no longer an empire of cold logic, but a partner to a small, defiant blue planet called Earth. Humanity hadn't sent a fleet to win a war. They had sent a man to win a heart. And in doing so, they hadn't just saved their own world, they had rewritten the stars. The alliance between the Valerian Empire and the United Earth was forged not in ink, but in the memory of a lavender field and a single impossible ship. If you enjoyed this journey through the stars and the depths of the human heart, don't forget to like this video and share it with your fellow explorers. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell for HFY Soundscape, so you never miss a tale of human defiance and galactic wonder. We have so many more stories to tell, and we want you right there with us. Until next time, remember, never underestimate a human with a story to tell.